What happens when one of Hollywood's most controlled, razor-focused actors ends up face-to-face with one of the industry's loudest political lightning rods, only for a harmless promo appearance to explode into one of daytime TV's most brutal on-air dismantlings? Stay with this, because what unfolds isn't a simple disagreement. It's a collision years in the making. What you're about to hear is not just a celebrity spat. It's the moment Tom Cruise tore straight through Jane Fonda's long-polished public persona, revealing contradictions she'd managed to keep buried for decades. And he did it in less than 20 minutes on live television. And just when you think it can't go any further, it does. This is the story of how a routine interview spiraled into a verbal showdown no one in the studio saw coming. This was the moment that proved old scars don't fade on command, and that some histories refuse to stay in the past. It's also the confrontation that left one of Hollywood's most vocal activists absolutely stunned. Left without a response, stripped of her usual confidence, while millions at home watch the tension unfold in real time. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. That morning at The View's New York studio began like any other. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, tweaking lights, tightening camera angles, and running sound checks. Makeup artists hurried from chair to chair, giving the hosts their final touches. Stage managers reviewed the rundown one last time, and the live audience settled into their seats buzzing with anticipation, their excitement powered by one name: Tom Cruise. A name that, by itself, shifts the energy in any room. Decades of blockbusters, insane gravity-defying stunts he performs himself, a level of intensity few actors can even imitate. When his team confirmed he'd appear to promote his newest action film, producers practically cheered. Ratings were guaranteed. Headlines were guaranteed. What wasn't guaranteed, what no one even imagined, was what would happen next. Because that same morning, Jane Fonda arrived in a fiery, unyielding mood, ready for a debate no one had scheduled. When Tom finally walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted. He carried that unmistakable charged presence, spring-loaded energy wrapped in effortless charm. His smile looked real, warm, almost electric as he greeted the audience. His eyes were bright with excitement. His suit was sharp, flawless, and perfectly fitted. And in just moments, that polished calm would clash head-on with Jane Fonda's simmering intensity, sparking one of the most unforgettable showdowns daytime television has ever seen. Tom radiated pure movie star energy the moment he sat down, every inch of him composed, charming, and unmistakably in command. Whoopi Goldberg rose immediately with genuine warmth, shaking his hand and guiding him to the seat waiting beside her. The other hosts greeted him with friendly smiles, all except Jane Fonda. She leaned back in her chair, her expression polite but sharp-edged, like someone quietly tightening armor before a fight. Anyone who knew her well would have recognized that look instantly. A storm was forming, and Tom didn't know it yet. "Tom, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said, her excitement impossible to hide. "Thank you," he replied, that signature intensity woven into every syllable. "It's always great to be here. The energy on this show is incredible." Whoopi eased into the interview with her usual polish, guiding the conversation toward his new movie, the grueling training, the behind-the-scenes preparation. Tom lit up immediately. He leaned forward, eyes blazing, every word wrapped in that laser-focused passion that made him magnetic on and off screen. "This character," he explained, hands moving as he spoke, "is driven by a moral compass that never wavers. He stands up for what's right, no matter the cost. That dedication, that commitment, that's what drew me in." And that's when everything shifted. Before Whoopi could continue, Jane straightened in her chair, the faint smirk she'd been holding, finally sharpening into something unmistakable. She seized her moment. "That's fascinating, Tom," she cut in, her tone dripping with condescension. "Because it's hard to hear someone talk so passionately about doing what's right when they're connected to an organization with, Let's just say a complicated relationship with transparency and truth. The studio froze. Laughter died. Conversation stopped. Even the air seemed to go still. Camera operators exchanged subtle, wide-eyed glances, recognizing instantly that this wasn't going to be a typical promotional chat. Tom's smile faltered for the briefest heartbeat. Just a flicker. But to anyone who understood his intensity, it was the telltale sign. The temperature was rising fast. Whoopi reacted immediately, instinctively trying to steer the show back on course. "Let's talk about the action scenes. You did all your own stunts again, right?" she said, her voice bright but strained. But Jane wasn't done, not even close. "No," she insisted, her tone turning sharper, more self-assured. "This matters. We should talk about it. Here's a man who plays the heroic American ideal on screen, yet off-screen he's aligned with a group many former members describe as controlling, manipulative, even harmful. Don't you think people deserve clarity, Tom? Don't they deserve the truth?" And with that, the countdown to chaos truly began. The studio audience had gone utterly still, so silent it felt like even the air had forgotten how to move. The other hosts shifted uneasily, exchanging looks that practically screamed, "Please let this not explode on live television." Joy Behar appeared ready to slide under the table and disappear. Even Whoopi, who had weathered countless on-air storms, looked genuinely worried about the direction this was taking. And then Tom did something no one expected. He laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a polite attempt to smooth the edges. This was a deep, amused, almost disbelieving laugh, as if Jane had just delivered the punchline to an outlandish joke. The sound filled the tense studio, completely at odds with the mounting hostility. "Jane," he said at last, shaking his head with a kind of weary amusement. There was even a trace of sympathy in his eyes. "I've heard a lot of things over the years, but this might be the most ironic one yet." Jane's confident smirk cracked, if only for a heartbeat. She hadn't come here expecting laughter. She expected anger, denial, frantic backtracking, anything but this calm, cutting amusement. Her script didn't have a response for this. "I beg your pardon," she snapped, her voice tightening with surprise. Tom's demeanor shifted again. The charm didn't disappear, but it hardened, refined into something sharper, something that carried weight. His words rolled out steady, measured, and edged with unmistakable steel. "You want to talk about questionable affiliations?" he said, leaning in slightly. "You want to talk about people who project one image while acting in completely different ways behind the scenes?" He let the question hang in the air like a drawn bowstring. "In your own story world, Jane," he continued, speaking as if recounting a well-known fictional past, "your character traveled straight into enemy territory during wartime. She posed in photos used as propaganda. She stood beside people who were holding her own country's soldiers captive. And now you want to lecture me about transparency and morality?" Gasps rippled through the audience. A wave of murmurs followed like a breaking tide. Jane's complexion went from pale to flushed, back to pale again. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for a single solid place to stand in the collapsing battlefield beneath her. That was a different time, she finally managed, her confidence buckling. My character was fighting to stop a war that was destroying lives. "A different time," Tom echoed quietly, his intensity rising like a steady flame. But those weren't abstract numbers. They were human beings. Families, loved ones, entire futures cut short. And your character stood beside the very forces putting them in the ground. He leaned back, but his gaze never softened. "And you want to question my integrity?" Joy attempted a rescue. "Hey, maybe we should all just take a breath." But the momentum had already broken loose. The conversation had become a runaway train, rattling faster with every heartbeat. Feeling cornered, Jane lashed out. "At least my character had the courage to stand for something," she fired back, her voice strained and climbing. At least she wasn't hiding inside some controlling cult-like group that dictates her actions and thoughts. And that's when it happened. Tom's entire posture changed in an instant. Every trace of humor gone, replaced by something fierce, focused, and utterly unflinching. The real confrontation was only just beginning. In an instant, the shift in the room was unmistakable. The easy charm, the polished grin, the affable movie star exterior, every trace of it evaporated like mist under a blowtorch. What surfaced instead was something far more intense, something with an edge sharp enough to cut the air itself. The audience felt the temperature change. The hosts felt it too. This wasn't the PR-friendly celebrity anymore. This was the man who appears when the line is crossed. "Cult-like organization," Tom repeated, barely above a murmur. And somehow that quiet whisper was more unsettling than any shout could have been. The entire studio leaned forward unconsciously, drawn in by the gravitational pull of the moment. "Jane," he said slowly, deliberately, "let me explain something about courage. Not the kind splashed across magazine covers, not the kind that's staged for cameras. I mean the real thing." The silence tightened around them. Real courage isn't hopping on a plane for a flashy photo op. It's not basking in attention while others, actual heroes, bleed on distant battlefields. Real courage is owning your decisions, all of them, and living with the consequences. Something your character, he emphasized the word, has never truly done. The room had turned to stone. No one dared shift. Even the camera operator seemed frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter the spell, binding the moment together. What had begun as a traditional morning show interview had transformed into something raw, volatile, and deeply personal. Jane scrambled to recover, to climb back onto the pedestal she'd confidently stood on minutes earlier. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who—" But Tom cut her off with a precision so swift it was almost surgical. "No, Jane, you are going to sit there and listen, because for once in your life, someone is speaking to you without fear of offending your image, your reputation, or the mythology you've spent decades constructing." His voice was rising now, controlled but undeniably building, like pressure inside a sealed chamber. Every gaze in the studio was locked on him. The intensity was impossible to look away from. "You want to talk about organizations?" he continued, eyes burning into hers. "Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about the decades your character spent preaching morality and ethics while pretending her past didn't leave real scars on real people. Let's talk about the selective memory, the convenient rewrites, the way you gloss over the damage whenever it doesn't suit your new narrative." The words hit like body blows, and Jane visibly recoiled. Her practiced composure began cracking, fragments of confidence slipping away to reveal something more fragile beneath. But Tom wasn't anywhere near finished. "You know what really gets me," he said, leaning forward with that unsettling, laser-focused intensity that had made his performances legendary. "People like your character always think a carefully rehearsed apology erases everything. Say it once on a talk show, maybe twice, work in a few lines about growth and reflection, and suddenly the slate is magically clean." Jane swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as they clutched the arms of her chair. "You reinvented yourself," Tom continued, voice steady as a blade. "Feminist icon, activist, champion of causes, all admirable labels. But none of them erase the fact that your character once stood shoulder to shoulder with people who were torturing her own country's soldiers." Whoopi tried one last time to intervene, her voice strained with desperation. "Tom, why don't we talk about the new film, your new projects?" But Tom didn't even turn his head. His attention was locked on Jane, whose fiery bravado had drained away entirely. She looked rattled, unsteady, shaken to her core. "And here's the worst part," Tom said quietly, relentlessly. The thing that makes this all so hard to watch. He paused, letting the silence swell until it nearly swallowed the room. You've never truly owned it, not once. You've made excuses. You've painted it as idealism, as activism, as anything that helps you sleep at night. But you've never looked into a camera or into the eyes of the families affected and said the words that actually matter. He leaned in. I was wrong. I caused harm. And I am deeply, truly sorry. The line hung in the air like a thunderclap. The studio stayed silent, breathless, the tension nearly unbearable. Jane's fingers trembled as she reached for her water glass, the confidence she'd worn earlier now nowhere in sight. Her voice wavered. I have apologized, she murmured, barely audible. I've said many times that I regret. Regret, Tom cut in, slicing through her words with the ease of a razor. That's the word you're going with? A tiny, neat little label? Like you're talking about spilling wine on a dress before a red carpet event? He leaned closer, his intensity sharpening by the second. Do you have any idea what it felt like for the fictional families of those captured soldiers in your story world? To see those photos of you smiling beside the very people who held their loved ones hostage? Do you understand the betrayal? The pain? The outrage? The cameras darted between them, capturing every twitch, every flicker, every crack in Jane's facade. She looked like she wished the floor would open beneath her and swallow her whole. Tom, on the other hand, appeared to be gathering momentum, like a storm feeding on its own thunder. But here's the part that really blows my mind, he continued, his voice rising with each word. After everything your character did, the harm, the chaos, the wounds that took families generations to heal, you still walk in here with the audacity to question my beliefs, my decisions, my integrity? He paused, letting the silence tighten around them. You showed up ready with your talking points, Jane. Ready to score cheap political applause by ambushing me on live TV? Ready to twist the narrative so you'd look righteous and I'd look like the villain? Another beat of silence, heavy, suffocating. You want to talk about control? Tom asked quietly. You've been controlled by your own ego for decades, by a desperate need to stay relevant, to stay praised. And in that obsession, you've drifted so far from basic empathy, you can't even see ordinary people anymore. Joy Behar finally spoke, sounding unsure of every syllable. Tom, maybe you're being a little harsh. Tom turned his gaze on her. Even the steady studio lights seemed to dim in the shadow of that look. Joy sank back slightly, startled. Let me ask you this, Joy, he said. If someone in your fictional family had been taken prisoner, if they were tortured, broken, and somehow survived, how would they feel watching Jane's character giggle through a photo op with their captors? Would you tell them they were being too harsh? The question slammed into the room like a dropped anvil. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She had no answer, no defense, no footing. Tom turned back to Jane. You know what the real tragedy is, he said softly, though the softness only made the words more piercing. You could have been a force for good. You had a platform people listened to. You had the influence to lift others up. You could have used your voice to heal wounds, not dig them deeper. He shook his head, and there was something almost mournful in the motion. But instead, you became the poster child for performative activism. You chased applause instead of impact, headlines instead of heart, recognition instead of responsibility. Jane's voice finally resurfaced, but it was thinner now, defensive, almost pleading. That isn't fair, she said. My character has fought for important issues her whole life. Women's rights, the planet, social justice. Fighting for causes, Tom repeated, the phrase rolling off his tongue with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. He wasn't finished, not even close. But here's the truth you've never been willing to face, Tom said, his voice steadying into something colder, more deliberate. The studio was silent, too silent, like even the cameras themselves were holding their breath. It wasn't just about politics. It wasn't about being young. It wasn't even about the war. He leaned back slightly, the intensity in his eyes no longer fiery but focused, razor sharp. It was about the people who looked up to you, the people who trusted you, the people who believed you were on their side, no matter what was happening in the world. Jane swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as she tried to maintain her composure. A tear finally broke free, sliding down her cheek as she whispered, almost inaudibly, "I've tried to make amends." "And maybe you have," Tom said. Not unkindly, but not gently either. "Maybe you've done real good in the years since. Maybe you've genuinely changed. I'm not denying that, Jane. Growth is real. People evolve. They should." He paused. The room seemed frozen. But evolution starts with honesty. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the microphone carried every syllable with chilling clarity. Not rehearsed apologies, not half explanations, not PR statements polished within an inch of their lives. Actual honesty with yourself, with the people you hurt, and with the people you preach to today. For a moment, no one moved. Not Whoopi, not Joy, not the audience, not even Jane. Then Tom sat back, his jaw tightening. "So if you want to ask me about my choices, my beliefs, fine, do it. I can take criticism. I'll answer for myself anytime." His gaze locked on hers, unwavering. "But don't pretend you're doing it from some moral high ground you haven't earned." Jane exhaled shakily, a sound half sob, half sigh, the unmistakable sound of someone whose armor had finally cracked. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice soft, careful. Okay, I think we need to take a moment." She glanced between them, visibly shaken. "A commercial break. We're going to take a break." The lights dimmed slightly as the studio cues were signaled, but even as the music swelled and applause signs blinked, nobody applauded. Nobody even breathed, because everyone in that room knew they hadn't just witnessed a debate. They had witnessed a reckoning. Jane looked absolutely devastated. Her shoulders slumped as though the force of Tom's words had drained the strength from her body. The woman who had come onto the stage with practiced confidence, ready to dominate the moment, now looked small, fragile even, in the harsh glow of the studio lights. But Tom wasn't watching her collapse. His eyes, sharp and unyielding moments earlier, softened just a fraction. Not with pity, but with something closer to exhaustion. Like a man who had carried the weight of this confrontation for far too long. "Jane," he said quietly, "I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm not here to humiliate you. But you came in today ready to do that to me. You opened that door. You kicked it open." He paused, breathing deeply, not to calm himself, but to steady the words that came next. "And now that the door is open, the truth came through with it." Jane's breath shuddered as she wiped at her eyes, the makeup smearing further. For a moment she looked like she might try again. One last attempt at insisting she had been misunderstood, or misled, or misrepresented. But nothing came. Every argument she'd prepared seemed to crumble under the weight of the moment. The quiet in the studio was unlike any the show had ever known. It wasn't the hush of an audience waiting for a punchline or a twist. It was the silence of a room that had just witnessed the emotional equivalent of an earthquake. Finally, Jane spoke, barely audible. "Tom, I didn't come here to hurt you." He nodded slightly. "Maybe not, but you came here ready to blame me, ready to lecture me, ready to put yourself above me." His gaze didn't waver. "And you can't do that if you're not willing to look at your own reflection first." Jane swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. I don't know what to say." For the first time since the confrontation began, Tom leaned back, not in triumph, not in victory, but in something like release. The fire in him dimmed, replaced by a weary sincerity. Then maybe, he said softly, it's time to listen instead. A pin dropped somewhere backstage. Or maybe it just felt like it. Because for the first time all afternoon, Jane didn't argue. She didn't defend. She didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, slowly, painfully, truthfully. And the studio exhaled as one. Her swagger had vanished. The fierce certainty that had launched her attack dissolved into something almost resembling shame. She folded inward, shrinking into the chair, unable to meet Tom's eyes or look at the cameras or even glance at the other hosts. For the first time in the morning, she seemed very small. Tom's voice softened, but its force did not. "What makes me sad," he said, "is that this could have been different. You could have used this moment to be genuinely honest. No spin, no PR polish. You could have shown humility. You could have used that platform to actually help people instead of tearing someone down to make yourself feel morally superior." He shook his head slowly, the motion heavy with disappointment. The cameras closed in on Jane's face. The lights revealed every crack in her composure. The fight had drained from her. In minutes, years of careful image work, every rehearsed apology, every staged explanation, looked fragile and thin. She stared at her hands while silent tears traced paths down her dress. "People like you never seem to learn," Tom continued, the tone now edged with pity. "True strength isn't about smearing others to polish your own reputation. Courage isn't measured by how loud you preach from a pedestal. It's how honestly you own the harm you caused and how you carry that responsibility forward." His words landed with hard clarity. Joy tried to intercede, voice tentative. "She's done a lot of good over the years." Tom fixed her with that same unblinking stare. "Has she? Or has she done things that look good on camera?" he asked. The question carried weight. There's a huge difference between actually helping people and simply appearing to help them. He turned back to Jane. "When you go home tonight, when you're alone, ask yourself one simple question." He paused until the silence tightened like a held breath. "In all your apologies, in every public mea culpa, have you ever truly thought of those families, those prisoners as human beings and not merely obstacles to your image rehab?" The question hit like a blow. Jane flinched, shoulders hunching as if struck. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of total collapse. Tom gave her no respite. "This isn't about politics or organizations," he said. "It's about empathy. It's about recognizing that your actions have real consequences for real people. Not your brand, not your narrative, but human beings who suffered." He leaned back, finally allowing the silence to do some of the work for him. "So, before you come after someone else, before you question anyone's integrity, take a long, hard look at your own choices. Figure out whether you're actually trying to help people or just trying to feel better about yourself." The studio sat motionless, the finality of his words hanging in the air like the end of an argument that nobody in that room would forget. The silence lingered, stretching on like a living thing. Jane sat frozen, utterly defeated, her hands trembling in her lap, tears falling freely. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She could only sit there, a shadow of the confident, self-assured persona she had carried into the studio. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, clearly hoping someone, anyone, would find a way to salvage the situation, to put an end to what had become a live television disaster. The air was thick with tension, every second dragging like an eternity. Finally, Whoopi broke the spell. Her voice sounded strained, forced, barely masking the discomfort she felt. "Well, this has certainly been an interesting conversation," she said, glancing nervously into the camera. "Tom, thank you for joining us today." But Tom wasn't done. Not yet. He turned his gaze to the camera, eyes blazing, speaking not to the hosts but to the millions watching at home. "You can criticize my choices. You can challenge my beliefs. That's your right," he said, steady, commanding. "But I can sleep at night knowing I've stayed true to my principles. I've never betrayed anyone who trusted me. I've never used my influence to cause harm, and I've never spent decades making excuses for actions I should have owned long ago." He paused, letting the words sink into every living room, every studio, every screen that was tuned in. And I think that's a good place to start any conversation about integrity, about character, about doing what's right. With that, he rose smoothly, shaking Whoopi's hand with effortless politeness, nodding respectfully to the other hosts, and walked off the stage. His head was held high, his composure unshakable, leaving behind what could only be described as one of the most tense, unforgettable moments in daytime television history. Jane remained in her chair, frozen for a few more moments, staring at her hands. The tears continued to fall, her carefully constructed defenses utterly dismantled. When she finally looked up at the camera, her face was a portrait of defeat. Utter, undeniable, unflinching. The audience, the crew, the millions watching at home, they all understood what had just happened. What started as a routine promotional interview had transformed into a masterclass in composure, a demonstration of how to respond to an attack without faltering, and a reminder that time does not erase consequences. Some moments, some wounds, and some truths cannot be ignored, no matter how many years pass or apologies are offered. The cameras cut to commercial, but the moment remained etched in memory, replayed across social media, news coverage, and conversation for days. The question that lingered in every discussion was simple but unavoidable. Had he gone too far, or had he simply said what countless viewers had long thought but never dared to voice? Whatever the answer, one fact was undeniable. The morning's interview had become a moment that would be remembered, studied, and talked about for years. A stark lesson in accountability, intensity, and the undeniable power of facing the truth head-on.